Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to get started in 1 minute. So please bear with us. This is our 6th presentation on YouTube. Lunch and Learn with the ABCA, and we have an exciting one for you today. Okay, just a quick little update there. Nina Sampson, my colleague, is going to be doing a great presentation on mammals in winter and some general things that mammals are doing. And before we get started, I wanted to go over some housekeeping things. If you are joining us through YouTube and you want to participate in the chat, please sign in and then you can actually do that. Otherwise, this will be recorded and left up on YouTube for a few weeks until we decide, and we're going to continue doing more presentations in the future. March 12th is the next presentation on birds in winter, and I'll be doing that presentation. So to get started, we are going to start with our land acknowledgement. And we just want to say that we acknowledge that we are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe people, and we recognize the long history of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people in Canada. We recognize and appreciate their stewardship of the land, and may we all live with respect on this land together in peace and friendship. So now, without any further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Nina.
Great, thanks, Denise. All right, friends, so let's learn a little bit about mammals. So mammals, we're going to look we're going to focus a lot on what they're doing in the winter and getting ready for winter, but we're going to look at sort of a year in the life, how mammals operate year round. So we're going to start in the fall, but always remembering that everything in nature is a cycle. So you have to pick a spot on the circle to start, and I have chosen autumn because it makes the most sense as it leads into winter, and it's a really important time for our mammals. So how do animals know that winter is coming? One of the really cool things is that all animals have an internal clock. So their body just knows. And that's to do with their long history on the land and their evolutionary history as well. So especially for our friends, especially the gray squirrel that we can see right here, they've lived in this part of Canada for thousands and thousands of years. So they know the seasons pretty well. Other things that change, the length of the day changes. So as we all know, as we head into the fall or into the winter from the fall, our days start to get shorter and shorter. There's fewer hours of daylight, and that can signal to our animal friends that winter is coming. Colder temperatures can also signal to some of our animal friends that winter's on its way. And changes in what food is available and how much is available also tells mammals that winter is coming. So for our squirrels, acorns are a really important food source for them in the fall. And so they know that once the acorns are ripe and ready, and they're eating lots of them and storing lots of them for winter, they know that winter is on its way. So once animals get through the fall, or has the day length starts to change, the weather starts to get a little bit colder, our animals need to decide whether they're going to migrate. So they're going to move to somewhere else in the world, maybe that's a little bit warmer. They're going to hibernate, so are they going to sleep through the winter time? Or are they going to stay awake and survive all winter? And all of the pictures that I've chosen here, each of these animals chooses a different or has a different strategy for dealing with the winter. So our opossum friend right here, they are a winter survivor. They will stay awake year round. Our groundhog friend down in the bottom here, They are a hibernator, so they will actually sleep through the winter time. And we actually find that a lot of mammals that make their homes in the ground or in burrows that they dig themselves, those are mammals that typically will hibernate because the ground gets frozen. Sometimes it gets covered with snow and it's harder for them to move about for that reason. Our squirrel friends right here, they mostly survive the winter. They spend some of the winter sleeping, but for the most part, they are awake and active. And then our two bat friends that we see right here, these are actually migrators. So they will travel south for the winter to find somewhere warm to spend the cold season. So in Canada, when we're thinking about mammals that migrate, we need to think that migration is actually a really expensive activity. And I don't mean expensive like they've got to buy gas and they need to pay for a hotel stay. That's a human cost thing, but it's expensive energy-wise. So it takes a lot of energy to move from place to place. So especially for our larger mammals, like when we're thinking about deer or moose, it can be really expensive energetically to move from place to place, which is often why you see them staying year-round in one spot. But in Canada, we find typically our ocean mammals, so those would be our whales and dolphins and orcas. Those all, they'll migrate from area to area, and then our flying mammals as well will migrate. So there are 8 bat species in Ontario, and 3 of them migrate, including the 2 that we see here. So we see the red bat and the silver bat right here. All right, let's talk about winter. So whenever we think about mammals that hibernate in the winter, one of the first animals that we ever learn about are bears. And bears are an amazing animal. They're probably the biggest hibernator, which is pretty cool. And bears, even though we don't see them too often here in Southern Ontario, sometimes we see them. But they will hibernate for the winter. But one of the cool things about bears is that when they hibernate, no pooping. So what is hibernation? So hibernation is different from going to sleep. So all mammals need to sleep, including us. If we didn't have that rest period, we would be very unhealthy. But when a mammal hibernates, instead of just their breathing slowing and their body relaxing, which is what happens when we sleep, their breath rate, so their breathing rate will slow way, way down, and their heart rate will slow way, way down, and also their body temperature will drop. So our groundhog friend, for example, right here, during the spring, summer, and fall, their heart rate is usually about 120 beats per minute. But when they're hibernate, their rest or their hibernating heart rate can be about 30 beats per minute. So that's a significant decrease. And then their body temperature also drops. So yeah. Size matters when we're thinking about our hibernators. Usually it's smaller animals that hibernate for the winter. We often don't see bigger animals, bears being the exception in that. We don't see those bigger animals hibernating. Now, when we're thinking about those true hibernators, so those animals that will go into a state where their body temperature is lower, their heart rate's lower, their breathing rates are slower for the winter time, we've got 3 sort of main groups of animals, and that includes here that live here in Southern Ontario. That includes our groundhog friends that we can see right here, bears that we talked about in the last slide, and then the remaining species of bats, including the little brown bat, which is what we can see right here. And the little brown bat weighs about 3 grams, so it's a pretty tiny bat. So sometimes we think about animals that we might say that they hibernate, but there's a difference between animals that go into hibernation versus going into something called torpor. So you might hear them referred to as the same thing, and they are very similar. It kind of just, the difference exists sort of on how long it happens for. So hibernation for our bears and our groundhogs and our bats, they spend all fall, really all animals spend fall, regardless of whether they're going to migrate, hibernate, or survive. They spend all fall fattening up. They want to eat as much as they can during the fall so that they will be able to survive however they're going to deal with the cold season. So animals that hibernate, they will go into that hibernation state and they will stay there for several months at a time. Now, how long they stay there largely depends on where the animal lives. So an animal that lives way up in northern Ontario might spend longer in hibernation than an animal that lives here in southern Ontario, and that has to do with the length of the day. So our day length here in southern Ontario is a little bit longer, and we get more sunlight sooner just due to how the earth tilts. So that's a reason why animals hibernate, but lots of animals, so like skunks and raccoons and squirrels and chipmunks, they will all do something called torpor. So it's very similar to hibernation. They'll go into periods where their heart rate is very slow, their body temperature drops, their breathing rate drops. But they might only do that for a couple days at a time or a couple weeks at a time. And sometimes it might be because of how cold it is outside. So if there's a big snowstorm or we have a really deep cold snap, our animal friends will slow right down, conserve all the energy they can, because hibernation, torpor, those are all about conserving their energy so that they can make it to spring. So our winter survivors, some of the strategies that animals employ or use to help them survive the winter, one of them is food storage. So every animal has a different way of dealing with this. Not all animals store food. Some of them store some food, some of them will forage throughout the season. It kind of depends. But often animals in the rodent family, which includes our squirrel right here and our chipmunk right here, they will store food for the wintertime. So our eastern gray squirrel right here, they will find, or they will hide one nut in various locations. And squirrels can actually smell nuts that they've hidden up to 10 centimeters deep. So if there's a good 10 centimeters of snow, the squirrel can still smell that nut through the snow, which is one of the amazing senses that squirrels have. Now, chipmunks, on the other hand, they're very similar to red squirrels, which we don't have a lot of here in southern Ontario, but they are more common as we head up into central and northern Ontario. They will store caches of food. So they like to put all their food in one location. So our chipmunk friends, they nest under the ground and they'll have a little cavity in their underground burrow that is just for food, that they will store throughout the fall and then use it all winter long whenever they wake up from their torpor and need a snack. Red squirrels, this is a midden, which is a waste pile, but you can actually see these are the scales of pine cones, and we can actually see sort of these straight pieces there. They're the main part of the pine cone. So red squirrels will also have a cache of food, but it's not usually underground. Another way that animals can survive the winter is by going through seasonal physical changes. So that might mean that they change color to better blend in with their landscape. And a great example of this is the snowshoe hare. So this is a snowshoe hare in the wintertime. You can tell that it is nice and white. But in the fall, the spring, summer, and fall, they look more like the cottontail rabbits that we see more regularly, and that they're a little sort of like a mottled brown, gray, white mix of colors there to help them blend in with rocks and grass and other vegetation. So that is another way that animals can survive the winter. Now, other physical adaptations that animals might have to help them survive the winter are things that they'll have throughout their entire life. So unlike when they just change color for the season, lynx, for example, which don't live here in southern Ontario, but up to central Ontario, like north of Barrie-ish, we might start to see some lynx. They have really big feet. And those feet help them to navigate really deep snow so that they're not sinking as deeply into the snow. You can kind of think of like a lynx has snowshoes on its feet because it helps it float in the snow. And then animals like deer and moose, they have very strong legs. So we can see that compared to the lynx here, who has a nice big feet, our deer has pretty tiny feet. So when they walk through the snow, they will sink quite deeply. So their legs need to be strong to get them through that deep snow. All right, so our animal friends have survived the winter. If they've migrated, they're returning back to the area. If they've hibernated, they're waking up. So what happens next? So animals will wake up again in response to that internal clock telling them, hey, it is time to wake up. They will also wake up in very similar sort of cues as when it's time to go to sleep for the fall or go into hibernation. Food sources will become available. So if the animal's a herbivore, like the rabbit that we can see in this photo right here, maybe some of their food starts to become available. The day length starts to change, that we get more daylight in the springtime, and temperatures start to heat up. Obviously not quite to this hot, but they do get nice and warm. So what else are mammals up to in this springtime? Springtime is a very busy time for most of our mammal friends when lots of babies are being born. So here we can see some baby bunnies and a little bit of a nest here. We can see a fawn, which is a baby deer. And all of those animals are born early in the spring so that they have time to grow and get strong and learn how to navigate the world before the next winter sets in. All right, so what do our animal friends do in the summertime? All of our animal friends, whether they are herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, whether they're a hibernator, a migrator, or a winter survivor, they spend their summer feeding and growing. So they are looking for food, trying to get as much as possible, and working on growing. They want to get bigger, stronger, faster, all the things that are going to help them survive. And then if we think back to the beginning of the presentation, as fall starts to set in, our animals will focus more on putting on fat for the wintertime to either get them ready for hibernation, to get them ready for periods of low food availability, if they're going to stay awake all winter long, or if they're going to migrate, because like we said, migration takes a lot of energy, and so they need to put on some fat. Even our tiny fat friends will put on a good amount of fat before they migrate south. All right, so now that we know a little bit about what our animal friends are doing throughout the year, we're going to think more specifically about winter and how we can find these animals or how we can know what they're up to. And that comes down to some tracking. So tracking is a way that we can read a story in the snow. So animals will leave behind trails and tracks and different signs that they have been through the area. Today, we're going to just go over some footprint tracks and talk about who might have left them and what to look for when you're out. But there are lots of great tracking ID books out there that if you are interested in tracking, I highly recommend that you check out. All right, so when we are tracking, we want to look at how many toes that we can see in the footprint. So it depends on the animal, and there's kind of a few categories that we're going to talk about today that'll help us at least narrow down who might have left the track. So if you come across a track and there are two sort of deep divots, but everything looks pretty well connected, two-toe tracks belong to ungulates is sort of the broader term, but in the area that we live in, we'd only be seeing deer. So if you see tracks that look like this, those are our deer friends. So they have been through the area. So two toes equals deer. Now, if you find tracks and you notice that there's bigger tracks, like these ones right here, and smaller tracks pretty close together. And you notice that the bigger tracks have 5 toes and the smaller tracks have 4 toes. Those tell us that a rodent left those tracks behind. And the rodent family in Ontario is pretty big. That includes our squirrels, our chipmunks, our mice, our voles, our moles, our shrews, and our groundhogs as well. And it also includes beavers. Now, beaver feet would look a little bit different because they have webbed hind feet, but they still have 5 toes on their back foot and 4 toes on the front. All right, so let's say you come across tracks where you are noticing that on both the back foot, which tends to be a little bit bigger, and the front foot, which tends to be a little bit smaller, they all have 5 toes, just like us as humans. We have 5 fingers and we have 5 toes on each foot. That could tell you that it could be a possum, a skunk, a raccoon, or it could be a member of the weasel family. And so this is a mink right here. So it could be a mink, it could be an ermine, it could be short-tailed weasel or a long-tailed weasel or a least weasel. There's lots of different weasels in Ontario. But even just knowing that it could be one of those animals really helps us narrow it down. So in this picture right here, which is an actual picture of some raccoon tracks, we can see, so this is the back foot because it's a little bit longer, a little bit deeper, and we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 toes, and then their front one tends to look a little bit like a hand, and we can pretty clearly see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 toes for the front foot of the raccoon. Now, if you come across something with 5 toes and you don't see any claw marks, now typically you'll see claw marks for the skunk or one of our friends in the weasel family here. We don't see really distinctive claw marks. We can be like, okay, it could be an opossum or it could be a raccoon. And one of the key differences is that for our opossum friends, their 5th finger really sort of sticks out differently. So it's way down here, whereas our raccoon friends look more like they're all close together. All right, so let's say you come across a track and it has 4 toes on both the front foot and the back foot. You can safely assume that that is either a canine or a feline. So in Southern Ontario, our 2 wild canines that you might come across tracks for are the coyote or the red fox. Now, depending on where you decide to go tracking, you will have to learn the difference between whether it's somebody's pet dog or whether it's a wild dog. But one of the key things that you can look for is, can you see any other human tracks nearby? And if you see lots of human tracks near these types of tracks, you can probably safely assume that that belongs to somebody's pet. And then just one other thing, if we're trying to tell the difference between a coyote and wolf tracks, the really key indicator is size. So wolves, this is fox. Foxes, their prints tend to be pretty small, usually no more than an inch or about 2 to 3 centimeters. And then coyotes can be 4 to 6 centimeters long. And then once you sort of get familiar with the footprints and like the number of toes and stuff that animals make, one of the really key things that is going to help you identify who, or maybe even just like what group of animals might have left that track, is the pattern that you see in the snow. So animals all move differently. So if we think about how a deer might move through the woods, they tend to walk 1 foot at a time, picking their legs up nice and high. But if we think of our squirrel friends, they tend to move along at sort of a bound or a gallop. So in this picture right here, we can sort of see if we were to draw a straight line up the tracks, each track would be on either side of that straight line. So this would be a diagonal pattern track. And I believe these tracks actually belonged to a coyote. Now, if we look at these tracks right here, we can see we've got some bigger, these are actually the back feet, and then we've got some smaller footprints right here, and these are actually the front feet. And typically when we see the front feet behind the back feet, that tells us that it's that gallop pattern. So our gallop pattern could be our squirrels, our chipmunks, or any of our rabbits. So these are actually rabbit tracks, and we can tell just by the length of the back feet. Squirrels tend to have much smaller back feet. All right, friends, so that is all I have for us today. So I want to invite you to head outside and look for some animal tracks in the snow. Well, the snow is still here. I know it's supposed to be warm for the next couple of days. So head outside, look for some animal tracks, make sure that you are being safe when you're outside, tell your adult where you're gonna go, and make sure that we are staying well away from our creeks and streams and lakes, because with the warm weather, those are gonna start to melt, and we might have some spring floods in the forecast soon as well. So keep yourself safe, but have fun.
All right, thanks, Nina. That was great. By chance, do you have any idea what this would be? This is actually a keychain.
Yeah, so we can tell by all of those stripes on the tail there that belongs to a raccoon. And in fact, I have a raccoon skull with me here. And one of the cool things about animal skulls is that when we find them, their teeth can actually sort of tell us about what that animal eats. So let's start with the beaver. So I have a beaver skull right here, and a beaver is a rodent, and most of our rodent skulls will actually look like this, but varying sizes. So the beaver is the largest rodent in North America. So obviously our mouse friends who are also rodents. You know, imagine that. So our raccoon or beaver friends, they have these sharp teeth at the front, which never stop growing, which is amazing. What we really want to take a look at is these teeth in the back here. So these teeth are very flat on top, and if we take a look right at there, we can see lots of ridges in them. But if I run my finger along them, they're pretty flat. And you know what? They remind me of my molars in the back of my mouth. And these teeth are great for grinding up plant material. So when we see a skull with lots of these flat teeth in there, and we don't see really, I know these are sharp, but we don't see any fangs at the front. That tells us this animal is a herbivore because it eats just plants. Now let's head back to our raccoon friend here. Now this skull's a little bit old, so it's missing a few of its teeth here, and that's okay. But we can tell that a raccoon does have some fangs in the front here. But if we look at the teeth in the back, now they're not quite as flat as the beaver teeth, but they're pretty flat. They're not that sharp. And they also seem very similar to the molars at the back of my mouth. Now the combination of the front fangs plus the back flat teeth right here, that tells me that a raccoon eats both meat and vegetation, making our raccoon friends omnivores, just like we are. Now, humans can make the choice whether they eat meat or not, but your body, in terms of your dental structure, means that you can eat both. Yes. So this right here is the top part of the skull of a coyote. So if we look at the fangs at the front here, lots of sharp teeth in the front, and then we continue on, we can see that those teeth are sharp all the way to the back of their jaw. And even if we look underneath, we can still tell that even though these ones are a little bit flat at the back, they're still very pointy. So these teeth, because their fangs, and they're made for ripping instead of grinding like the flat teeth on the beaver are. These teeth are designed for eating meat, and coyotes are carnivores. And that's the lower jaw of the coyote. So you can see that those sharp teeth extend both on the lower jaw and on the upper jaw.
Awesome. Thanks, Nina. Well, we have another talk planned for March the 12th at noon, and it will all be about birds in winter. So if you're interested in learning more about birds, check the YouTube channel or sign up via the website and get a Zoom invite. So that's all for now. We'll see you again.
Have a great weekend, everyone.